A long time ago and far, far away from the Grand Canyon, I ran the Iditarod 4 different times. I ran the race in 78, 79, 82, and 86. I'd like to tell you a few things about the race. I'd like to tell you how wonderful it is to run the race and to compete. I'll chat with you about the dogs and what it takes to feed and maintain a team successfully so that you too could be an Iditarod finisher.
Welcome to the Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, international expedition guide, conservationist, and yogi, Mandela.
We're floating in the Grand Canyon. We are right around mile 40, and I'm here with John Wood and 3 other fantastic guests who are in my raft today. This is one of my favorite sections of the river. It's so quiet, and it seems like a good opportunity to talk about the Iditarod, right? I mean, here we are in the Grand Canyon, and we have a guest who raced in the Iditarod 4 times. And so we're going to go on a journey today. I want to just start by saying thank you so much, John, for allowing me to interview you on your vacation.
Well, thank you very much, Mandela. This is just a great trip. It's a great place to be, and it's just a wonderful day.
I'm momentarily going to hand my microphone to John so that he can tell his story, and you might hear me rolling quietly in the background. John is an Alaskan adventurer who was once an avid dog musher, and now he's an avid cross-country skier. He competed in the Iditarod in 1978, 1979, 1982, and 1986. My first question for you, John, is where did you grow up, and how was adventure a part of your childhood?
Thanks, Mandela. My earliest memories are of early childhood in a place called Salem, Oregon. My birth certificate lists my father's occupation as a distiller, and that he was. His father, my grandfather, started a winery in Salem, Oregon during the Depression. And after the war, my father came back from being a naval aviator in the South Pacific and helped his father build up the business. I was born right after the war. My earliest memories are of walking around the winery, climbing over the big wine hoses, the wine vats, and I still think of that when I smell that peculiar smell. Growing up in Oregon, we had a chance to drive around in the countryside and hike around in the hills somewhat. After a few years, my father got the lure of adventure and decided to move north to Alaska. We moved right before statehood in 1958. I remember when in January 1959, Alaska became the 49th state, and everybody's quite happy, although Alaska was a much smaller state than it is now. There were a little over 200,000 people and no industry. There was still a lot of subsistence lifestyle and several large military bases. Shortly after we arrived in Alaska, the homesteading bug hit my dad, and he went out and staked a 160-acre homestead quite a ways away from Anchorage and off the road system. And today it's known as Big Lake, which is a major recreational area near Anchorage. We were near Big Lake, although not right on it, and we accessed our homestead with the four-wheel drive vehicle on a road named the Burma Road, after the Burma Road in Southeast Asia at the close of World War II. The Burma Road traversed terminal moraine of the Knik Glacier. It's called the Elmendorf Moraine, and today is just a series of steep gravel hills, totally wooded, because once you got away from the moraine, you got into lowlands, and it was muddy, and jeeps got stuck. So we moved on to the homestead, and I self-taught the 6th and 7th grades while we lived there, proving up on the homestead. My mother is 99, almost 100, recently reminded us that one week father couldn't make it in. It was during breakup and muddy, and you just couldn't drive in. She was out of food except for a bag of onions, so she made an onion pie for dinner, and it was pretty darn good. We were on a lake, and if I wanted protein, I had to go out and catch trout. There were rainbow trout there, so I was forever fishing for trout. We ate a lot of fish, but fish and onion pie tasted really good. Father showed up not long after that, and we moved on to regular cuisine. After living 2 years on the homestead, we moved into town, and I started the 9th grade. Hunting was part of the way of life as I was growing up. Every fall we'd go out hunting in different places. Sometimes we'd fly in, sometimes we'd drive. We usually managed to catch a moose or a caribou, which would be cut up and stored in the freezer, and that was our main protein for the year. When I was old enough, I was allowed to take that first shot, and many adventures were had in tracking down the animals. As I grew older, I went to college in Anchorage because we had no money, then had just enough money to go to school in one semester in Fairbanks. I worked the summer job as a brush ape on a BLM crew, survey crew. We lived up in the mountains, and my job was to climb up to the head of the survey line every day and chainsaw the trees and alders, climb the hills in front of the chainmen who would measure the distances so we could do our cadastral surveys. Climbed a lot of hills, cut a lot of wood, a lot of adventure, and seeing a lot of different countryside there in the hills around Anchorage. I did the same the next year, and I guess that living in the mountains for an extended period of time, living in a tent camp, instilled a love for the hills that I maintain till today. When I was in college in Fairbanks, we had enough money to pay for one semester at school, so I got a job living in the university fire department. We had a lot of exciting times there, fighting fires off campus, having fun on campus, met people that we'd like to travel around in the hills around Fairbanks, look at the mining camps, have adventures in the hills. It was more or less a way of life. Kathy and I got married our last year in college. After college, we moved to a place at the end of the road called Healy, Alaska. I have a degree in mining engineering, and I started working for the coal mine. Every day was an adventure at Healy. I was the only engineer and the youngest of the management by at least 10 years, and I won't say I was picked on, but it was a school of hard knocks, but the superintendent was kind enough to take me under his wing just enough to teach me a lot of the ways in which you could keep equipment moving, not get stuck, not have accidents, not turn over, and deal with a rough and tumble crew of experienced miners. We used to climb the hills there, prospecting for more coal, a lot of fun hunting trips in the fall. Come wintertime, it was more adventure. We would go for weeks at a time when we never saw temperatures above 40 below. And you dress for the cold and you deal with it. Kathy and I used to drive to town and pick up a load of powder in a 5-ton truck and then haul it back to the 120 miles of the mine. And then another guy and I would drill out a pattern. We'd load the holes, shoot the powder off. It would blow up enough sandstone for the mining crew to mine for 3 or 4 days. The next day we'd make another run to town for a load of powder, and we'd repeat. All of that when it was well below zero. Some people may call that drudgery, but boy, I call that a real adventure. You couldn't find any place else. Time went on, and a guy from Oregon who was I think he was a Umatilla Indian, became a shop foreman, and he had trapped when he was younger. And we got together, decided we should start running a trap line. And the first year that we ran the trap line, we walked it after work in the dark. The second year, I had a bright idea. We were more or less confined to just within an hour's walk of the end of where we were mining, just due to time constraints. So I figured if I got a dog team, that I could cover a lot more ground and maybe catch more fur. So there were some people around Healy at that time that had recreational dog teams, and the guy gave me 3 dogs because he was getting out of mushing. I learned much later that when somebody gives you dogs like that, nothing but excitement follows. We had 3 dogs that may have pulled a few times, and I got a used sled, and we tried to run our trap line. Well, one dog got appointed to be the lead dog, and we got him to lead somewhat. I think we spent more time working with the dog team, just trying to get them to go where we wanted, than we actually did trapping. But it was great excitement, and it instilled a love for mushing that fueled my interest for about 14 years. Eventually, we ended up with 5 dogs that were pulling the right direction, and we did fine trapping. We also met a guy at the time, his name was Mark Wooster, who had registered Malamutes, and he had been on some expeditions with dogs over in Denali Park, and 10-day camping trips with a 10-foot long basket freight sled. So I immediately had visions of touring around with my dog team, and I talked to a guy named Bill Nancaro there at the park, and I ordered a 10-foot basket sled, which took him almost a year to build, but I eventually was a proud owner of this great freight sled. So we started doing overnight trips and 2-day trips with our 7 dogs, registered Alaskan Malamutes. After that year, Mark moved to Manly Hot Springs, and we moved to the outskirts of Anchorage, Alaska. And it became an annual tradition to take the dog team and run them into Manly Hot Springs and visit Mark and his family. And then we would go out to other places from Manly Hot Springs, down to Tanadon, Eureka, other areas. I met 3 guys the first time we were in there. Iditarod. One of them's name was Rick Swenson, another guy, Ron Tucker, the third, Ed Salter, who I eventually got a couple of dogs from. Rick said he was going to run Iditarod the next year, and he kind of got us all fired up about Iditarod. Turned out that not the first year, but the second year he ran, he won, and went on to win the Iditarod 5 times.
That's the voice of John Wood. He's currently sitting on an 18-foot raft floating through the Grand Canyon. We're coming around the corner here, and we're going to run President Harding Rapid. Before we jump into the Iditarod, many people ask me, are you actually recording on location? So I want to see if you can paint the picture with words. What are you looking at right now? Can you describe the recording studio today?
I am looking at probably the most grand painting in all of Western United States. Starting from the top, I see absolutely cobalt blue sky. My vision drops down, and I see the white chalky cliffs of limestone, and it drops into red of a sandstone, and back down into the white of a limestone. And beneath that all, we're flowing on the magnificent Colorado River, which is a greenish color at this location, interspersed with flecks of white from rapids as we go down them. I'm sitting on the raft with my wife of 55 years, Kathy, and guide extraordinaire, Mandela. And in the back of the boat are 2 other ladies who are also from Girdwood, so all 4 of us are from Alaska.
For someone listening who doesn't even know what the Iditarod is, when you say words like mushing and dog teams, can you tell us a little bit about that?
The Iditarod is a 1,000-mile dog sled race across Alaska, beginning in Anchorage area, and it ends in Nome, Alaska. The race was founded by Joe Reddington Sr., who wanted to commemorate the Iditarod Trail, which about 1910 consisted of a route from Seward, Alaska to the recently discovered gold fields in the Iditarod district in the town of Iditarod. The old-timers would freight supplies there in the winter, and following a long tortuous trail from Seward through the Anchorage area and up across Rainy Pass, down through McGrath area, and then down to Iditarod. He wanted to commemorate this trail, and while they were at it, since it was 49th state, he wanted to make it 1,049 miles. So in order to do that, you kind of had to extend the trail up to Nome, which also was a historic gold rush town in the late 1890s that all sorts of Old West characters ended up, such as Wyatt Earp built the Dexter Saloon that is in business all the way through today. Joe put together a group of volunteers. They went out, marked where the trail ought to go. There was really no trail at that time to speak of, and got somebody to put up a $50,000 prize purse for the first race in 1973. And 31 or 32 intrepid individuals signed up. The first musher to cross the finish line was in 20 days that year. The last musher finished in 30 days. I think there were 32 people started and 23 or 24 finished. It was known as an extended camping trip. So it was held annually after that. As the years progressed, the prize money grew and the trail became more well-defined. A lot of work was done on it, marked more carefully. More sponsors came on board. The race organization that originally was volunteers expanded to the point where it had to hire a race director and then a staff. Eventually, Iditarod built a headquarters building in Wasilla, Alaska, where people can go today to get tours and ride dog carts and generally learn about the Iditarod and buy memorabilia. After meeting Rick Swenson in 1975, which is after two Iditarods, he got us, all the people that were staying at Mark's house, or became really interested in Iditarod. Of course, Rick went on to win the race 5 times, and some of the other folks that were staying at Mark's house also ran the race, including myself. In order for me to be ready to run Iditarod, and I needed to gear up with more dogs and more time training them, and of course I needed to learn a few more things about mushing. I was pretty good at winter camping and trapping, but not so much in racing. And of course, my dogs were not necessarily race dogs, but they were dogs that are happy on the trail, like to pull, like to camp, and we used to that sort of a lifestyle. First Iditarod I set off on was in 1978 with the intention of just finishing. I built my own dog sled, and we went off and we finished in 20 days, and I think that I got 29th place. It was really exciting. My wife and kids were in Nome. There was an eclipse of the moon, literally as I was running the last 10 miles into Nome along Front Street. I can tell you that the exhilaration of going around Cape Nome and seeing the lights of Nome has been equaled by few other experiences in my lifetime. After the first race was complete, it was like, okay, after I decompressed, and I had been maintaining a full-time work as well, so I had to get back to work and get into the city routine. Didn't take too long before I got the bug to run it a second time, but I'd like to run it more competitively. So I set about putting together a more competitive team. The conditions in 79 were a lot more challenging than conditions the first year that I ran. There's a lot more snow, a lot more really cold weather, 30 and 40 below. And the trail was a southern route, which, backtracking just a little bit, once you leave the ghost sit town of Ophir, one route goes through Portman and then Ruby and down the Yukon to Caltag. The southern route, the trail turns to the east and actually goes over through the abandoned town of Iditarod. From there, it goes over to Shagaluk and then up the Yukon to the town of Caltag, where you proceed on to Unalakleet and then up the coast to Nome. In the winter, there's always a trade wind that blows down the Yukon, so when you're on the southern route, you've got 150 plus miles going into the winter breeze, which when it's above zero is not too bad. When it's below zero, it can be challenging. We managed to run that route also, and I did considerably better. I ended up in 22nd position. I had a pretty darn good dog team, but didn't really have much in the way of leaders, so we mushed along at a pretty good pace. It left me thinking, boy, I could have maybe done a little better, but the conditions were different. I successfully ran Iditarod 2 other times, in 1982 and in 1986. The differences between the times were that my dog got progressively faster, but so did the competition. So I always was just north of 20th position. It pay is through 1 through 20, but I always had a really good time. After the 1982 race, I was voted by the mushers to be the mushers representative in the board of directors. I considered it to be quite an honor, and I had a lot of experiences when I did that. The 82 race was kind of noteworthy because that was the first time that somebody tried to go out in a ground storm from Shaktoolik to win the race. The native musher named Herbie Nyakpuk, who was a crowd favorite. He's from a small town, Eskimo village of Shishmarath, and his dogs were known for being happy dogs. Herbie is known for being a happy guy, and he's a great ivory carver. But he went out into a ground storm, which is when the wind is blowing 30 or 40 miles an hour, and it blows the snow so you can't see in front of you very well. His thought was if you could successfully go across Koyak Sound and get ahead of the other mushers, that he could win the race. He went out and spent a very cold night, couldn't find the trail, ended up coming back into Shaktoolik in the morning. Eventually there were 20 teams that waited in Shaktoolik for the ground blizzard to clear, which it did the next day, and they all took off in a shotgun start. That race was also won by Rick Swenson. What's notable about it is that Libby Riddles tried that in 1985, and she was the first woman to win the Iditarod because she successfully traversed the ground blizzard. Her dogs were from Eskimo village of Teller and were used to traveling in the windy conditions. So she is a gritty lady, but she managed to negotiate the ground blizzard and win the Iditarod.
Now, we've got some questions on the boat regarding the dogs. So curious about the dogs. When you say lead dog, what do you mean? What are some of the characteristics you're looking for in these dogs? How do you name them? What do they eat out there? What do you eat out there? Can you tell us a little bit about the structure and the skeletal system of this incredible race that happens every year?
Dogs that the mushers use in Iditarod are Alaskan Huskies. Dog is man's best friend. Alaskan Huskies traditionally been bred to be friendly and to pull loads around. Originally, they were used by the native peoples to pull their makeshift sleds where they would pull supplies, either going from one camp to the next or to move to a different camp. And as the white men began to come into Alaska, they were used as method of transportation. Dogs were selectively chosen for those who were friendly to man and who loved to pull. And through the generations, they became more and more instilled to run. Today, the dogs are not so much used for transportation and more for recreational purposes, where families can hook up dog sleds and go out on the trails with the whole family having a small team and enjoying a ride. And sometimes people will collect dogs and race them. A dog team is composed of a series of dogs that are hooked in tandem to a sled that used to be made out of hardwoods such as birch or oak. The first sled that I built was built out of oak. As technology has progressed, people have started using more modern materials such as reinforced carbon and UHMW white plastic. The formation that dogs are hitched into are typically 2 side-by-side, and then a series of these 2 side-by-sides forward. A 3-dog team would be 2 dogs and then a single dog in front, which is called a lead dog because it's the first dog to go down the trail. A recreational team might be 5 dogs, which is 2 dogs next to the sled, which are called wheel dogs, 2 dogs in the middle, which are called team dogs, and then a single dog out front, which is called a lead dog. If you progress up to a 7-dog team, you've got the 2 dogs in the back, which are wheel dogs, then 2 dogs that are team dogs, then the third set of 2 dogs behind the leader at this point are called swing dogs, and finally you have the leader. Usually you're mushing out on a trail that somebody else has mushed, or there's been a Nome machine drive, but as you're mushing along, you might come to a fork in the trail. If you want to go right, you train your lead dog. You would give the command G, which means go to the right. You say ha, it means go to the left. If you say whoa, that means stop. If you say hike, that means go. It helps to train a new lead dog with an old lead dog that understands the commands, and the dog you're training to be lead will hear the command and get pulled to the right or to the left, or to stop or to go on command. And the dogs that you use for lead dogs can be quite intelligent and will quickly pick up on the commands. And of course, the dogs always try to please the musher, so very quickly they learn the commands, and it's not quite like steering a vehicle, but if there develops a strong bond between the musher and the leader trying to do what the musher wants, you'll be able to execute the commands quite readily. The dog team will only perform as well as the food that you give them. You need to fuel the body like a human athlete. If you eat the right foods, you can optimize your performance. If you eat junk food, not so much. The same is true with a dog team, especially a long-distance racing team where you're spending many hours in the harness pulling. It used to be that the best feed that you could give a dog on the trail was beaver meat. And the beaver is high in fat content, a lot of protein, and dogs did very well by it. With modern technology, there has been developed a lot of high-performance commercial dog foods that have just the right ratio of fat and protein. Like 25% protein, 21% fat. The dogs are performing at cold temperatures, and it takes a lot of calories just to maintain body temperature before you start to perform. When you're on Iditarod, a cycle of run-rest might be running 4 hours on and 4 hours off, or 3 hours on or 3 hours off, or sometimes stretch it out to maybe 3 hours, have a short break, another 3 hours, and then have a 6-hour rest. The cycles used to be you'd run 50% of the time up until you got to the coast. By that time, the metabolism of the dogs were such that you could run them longer hours. I think that holds true pretty much to today, even though it's been 40 years since I ran my last Iditarod. I've kept close touch with the race and watched the performances. But every time you stop to rest the dogs, you've got to water them as well. And so key may be to mix a meal that is, you might call it a slurry, where it's a commercial food mixed with water so that you could pour it almost like a real thick milkshake. Or sometimes you would take ground up chicken or ground up hamburger and just mix it in water like a soup and feed it to them with a ladle. To do that, of course, everything is frozen because it's wintertime. So when you are stopping to rest, the dogs get to rest, the musher gets to work. And every time you stop the dogs, immediately you need to give them some water and a little bit of food so that they're awake and they're ready to eat before they curl up and rest. So you need to get them that food before they decide to rest. Then you get to go about, sometimes you have to thaw snow to make water, sometimes you have water available at checkpoints. And you make a meal for the dogs, you put it in coolers or containers that you carry, and you let the dogs rest. Then you might wake them up after 3 hours and give them another full meal, and then let them rest some more before you take off and run. So the musher, after he prepares the meal for the dogs, feeds himself, he may get an hour's nap or half-hour's nap before he has to start gearing up and getting ready to mush again. So the dogs are fairly well rested, not so much the humans. When you run Iditarod, there are checkpoints along the trail that are separated between every 50 or 80 miles. You prepare your food for yourself and the dogs, put them in burlap bags that are stenciled where the checkpoints they go to. You drop them off a week before the race. They're flown out to the checkpoints so that when you get to a checkpoint, you get your bags. And you immediately will break those bags open and start to prepare your dog meals. The human meals come later. You need to prepare the meals so that they're easy to cook, and if all possible, maybe in seal bags so you can drop it in with the dog food when it's cooking in the bag and thaw it out and be warm. So when you're done feeding the dogs, you can open your bag and eat your meal. In running Iditarod, I mentioned before that Iditaroders get very little sleep. I found, after thinking about the first 3 Iditarods, that if I was ever to get into any trouble, it was always right around daybreak. So the last time I ran Iditarod, I made it a point of always trying to sleep around sunrise. It seemed like I had just had a biorhythm low that you just couldn't fight. So what I did, sunrise is around 6 o'clock in mid-March in Alaska. No matter what I was doing, I'd pull over and try to sleep between 4:30 and 6 o'clock. If I did that, I was good to go for most of the rest of the day. In the afternoon, when the sun is high and the temperature is a little warmer, I'd also take a little cat nap. And so what I do in that case, you're usually out on the trail someplace, you just put all my clothes on, lay down in the snow. You wake up when you get cold, and then it's time to go again. With a little nap in the afternoon and maybe an hour and a half worth of sleep in the morning, I was good to go all day, and I didn't seem to run into any troubles. If I tried to mush through the biorhythm low, you'd take the wrong trail, or you'd end up dinking around with your dog booties and losing time. And so just better, rather than to fight it, to go ahead and rest. I guess my final thoughts on Iditarod are that it's a great experience, and anybody who wants to see a good cross-section of Alaska and likes to work with dogs and has the time and the physical capabilities to spend a lot of time out working with the dogs in can be physically demanding conditions, to seriously consider collecting a few dogs and trying your hand at just some cross-country travel. Go out recreationally, run dogs for a day, see if that's what you like to do. If it is, go ahead and try a couple of local races to see if that's still what you like to do. And if you like to camp and you like to work with dogs and you like to race, seriously consider taking the next step and flying to Alaska and watching Iditarod and talk to people who've run the race and talk to race officials and see what you need to do to set your sights on becoming the next Iditarod musher. To date, there's only been about 900 people finish the Iditarod race, coming up on 50 years that it's been run. On some good years, 900 people make it to the summit of Denali. You're a rare breed if you finish the Iditarod.
That is the voice of John Wood. He has competed in the Iditarod 4 different times, and today he was talking to us about his experiences and his teams of dogs and mentors while floating down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. John, I'd like to end your show with 3 bits of life advice that you have with whoever's listening out there.
3 pieces of advice I'd like to give folks who want to run the Iditarod or just generally in life are: know your limits. Know when it's time to stop. Know when the conditions are just too tough and you need to wait for other mushers to come by, or wait for the trail breakers to break the trail, or wait for the weather to get better. Second piece of advice would be: don't give up. Know when to stop and rest, but don't give up. It may be that you're tired, or you fell and you hurt yourself really bad, or you just don't feel so good, or sometimes your dogs will get a little sick, just for whatever reason. Don't just stop and say, that's enough, I'm done. Spend a day waiting at a checkpoint and just recover, both you personally and the dogs. Get 12 hours sleep. Get up, think about it. You'll probably look outside or get out of your sleeping bag and your dogs will be out there wagging their tails and looking at you and saying, come on, boss, let's go. How come we've been waiting so long? The third piece of advice I'd like to give you, which kind of dovetails with the second piece, is listen to your dogs. The dogs are what this is all about. If the dogs are looking tired, it's time to stop and take a break. If the dogs are still excited to go, maybe it's time to keep going. They'll tell you what they want to do, and it's all about them. So be tuned with your dogs and listen. And by knowing what your limits are and knowing when it's time to rest, and by listening to your dogs, you will be a successful Iditaroder.
John, thank you so much for your time and energy joining me here today on the Trail Less Traveled.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me reminisce about things that I haven't thought about for a few years, and it was just this glorious landscape that we are going past. I'm sitting here by the water in the Grand Canyon on the last night before the end of our trip. I can hear the water in the background. There's about 1 million stars in the sky overhead. And I'm going to play a song for you that I composed the words to go to an old George Strait song, and it's called White Mountain by Morning. Here we go. Ooh, 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 ooh. White Mountain by morning, just down from good old Nome. Everything that I brought is just what I got on. When the moon is high in the Alaskan sky, I'll be pushing through a ground blizzard. White Mountain by morning, White Mountain, I'll be there. Ooh, 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 ooh. Drop my dressing dogs in Ruby, put my sled out in the bird. Lost some socks and a jackknife somewhere along the way. But the team's looking good when I know they should, and the competition's far behind. White Mountain by morning, White Mountain's on my mind. Ooh, 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 ooh. White Mountain by morning, just down from good old Nome. Everything that I got is just what I got home. My dog team is long and the leader's bone strong. Miles keep flying by. White Mountain by morning, White Mountain's where I'll be. This is John Wood, and that's a song about the Iditarod that I put words to an old George Strait song.
Hey there, my name is Nuria Nulliner, and I'm ambassador for the Montana Wildlife Federation, the oldest conservation organization in Montana, dating back to 1936. MWF is committed to protecting Montana's wildlife habitats and access to public lands. My conservation tip is to get engaged with your state's legislature. Advocating for laws that will protect wildlife and habitat are some of the most important work that conservationists can do. Writing to your local legislator about your concerns can go a long way. And remember, when you write to your legislators, be polite and respectful. MWF always has great resources to stay engaged with the legislature, as well as bill tracking and educating the public on how to have their voices be heard. For more information and become a member of the Montana Wildlife Federation, visit montanawildlife.org. That's montanawildlife.org.
That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, conservation is not a spectator sport. Living in Missoula is a privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Please get educated and engaged. Speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, well, then you've never spent the night with a mosquito.